Now let's think about accountability. Without accountability, achievement is next to impossible. When you have a team of 5 people, it's easy to hold everyone accountable, but when you get to 5,000 people, that's when accountability can start to break down. And the stakes are so much higher because the numbers are so much bigger. At that level, lack of accountability equals tons of risk and almost no reward. But in order to be really effective, accountability needs to be aligned with the strategy or growth initiative. That's what gives the entire team a true north. Otherwise, you have a lot of rigor without a lot of reward. You might have a group of individuals or a group of departments that are 20 degrees off a true north, which impacts the entire machine. One cog doesn't click and the whole machine will be off. But when you can achieve that kind of scaled accountability, remarkable things can happen. Take Sumo Logic, for example. Going public is a milestone that few startups reach, but Sumo Logic rang the NASDAQ bell in the midst of the pandemic, proving that accountability of each revenue-driving team member is the key to long-term success. And we're grateful to have Sumo's CEO, Ramin Sayar, with us today. Ramin, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
What is the impact for you now as a publicly traded company? And what advice can you give other CEOs who are preparing to implement predictability across their revenue process?
Well, I think it boils down to a few things, Andy. As a private company, so the first thing is the metrics that matter. That's one category.
Okay.
Second is accountability. And third is organizational structure, right? And models. And those three have to go kind of hand in hand. The metrics that matter when you're a private company, when you're venture backed, tend to be very much around ACV, right? Or annual contract value or ARR. Public markets don't get exposed to that. They're worried more about revenue and billings and op loss. And so there's this transition that you have to go through as a leadership team, as a company, in terms of what you're internally communicating and measuring versus what's going to be assumed and expected of you externally when you go public. And you're in that conundrum all the time because compensation is based on ACV, right? And revenue is a lagging indicator. And we're 99.5% ratable subscription revenue, so we don't have much services. So, and most of our contracts are 1 or 2 years. And so every business will change depending on how much license to service or contract terms and the like are there, right? So I think the first bucket as you're preparing for predictability is making sure that you have the metrics that matter and that you can transition from what you're measuring today to what you need in the public market.
Let's unpack accountability.
So it's not the job of the sales leader only. Accountability for the number is more than that. Because back to the metrics that matter, suddenly your net dollar retention, suddenly your renewal rates associated with that, suddenly your revenue from renewals, right? Suddenly your land and expand model, right? And so that becomes now a collective ownership. Collective ownership of the CFO, the CEO, the CRO, and depending on the next bucket, your organizational model structure, if you have separate P&Ls or GMs or BUs or whatever else, right? And so accountability doesn't always work because most companies are functionally oriented. And you need to move from a functional structure to an accountability structure. And that is not just by location or I run sales or I run marketing, right?
That move, Ramin, from functional structure to accountability structure is so powerful. It's really the way that you get entire organizations coordinated and working together. We see this move in multiple customers we work with, where they are operationalizing strategic growth initiatives from the boardroom all the way down to the front line. And it sounds like the tool you are using at Sumo Logic to make that connection are the metrics that matter.
Yeah, and I think there's a connective tissue between the metrics that matter and accountability and org. And the maturation of a company in the small or early to mid stage It's really about customer count and wins. Then it's about the size of deals at different stages, right? Then it's about landing and expanding, right? And how quickly you can grow the cohorts, right? But those are still really much focused on ACV. And then non-quota carrying folks have different metrics. And they're typically on OKRs, right? And so the blending between OKRs, which are by definition meant to be BHAGs in a lot of cases, right? You're only supposed to accomplish 80%. You can't tell a sales rep you can only accomplish 80% of your number.
Right.
So
Right.
You need to figure out what metrics that matter, that span the different types of predictability you need, not only from a bookings and revenue, but from other functions in the business. On-time release and quality of software, service uptime, customer sat, and more importantly, NPS, right? And then other financial metrics, like I mentioned, that the public markets will care about, that you need to brain train the org on, bring them along. So the metrics that matter map to accountability and how you actually incent an MBO or OKR people. And in some cases, you have to make organizational structure changes to accelerate that or change behavior.
Revenue is not just an outcome, it's a business process that you can streamline and manage. And what you're seeing now is multiple dimensions that you need to manage, and you need to get predictability out of those different dimensions. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I'll give you a more concrete explanation. You know, we started as a cloud log scale analytics company. And over the years, we extended to compliance and security, to cloud SIM. By and large, those were the same selling motions. Same time, we extended from logs to metrics for monitoring. That's selling to developers, site reliability versus the security analyst or security operations or CISO. So now you have both a top-down and a bottom-up selling motion. You have different sales cycles as a result, right? And by segment. And so the point being is, if you keep growing and putting resources in a pure functional model, and you don't have an accountability-based organizational model that aligns these metrics, it's harder to drive ownership. It's harder to drive predictability, to your point, right? So now we have a multifaceted go-to-market. We sell top-down, bottom-up, for anything from self-serve to top-down in a CISO, right? And the importance of revenue predictability has to be driven by the importance of new logo lands, has to be driven by the expands, has to be driven by attach base to your install base in terms of new modules, right? And the penetration into your install base. Because as you grow and you have thousands of customers, attach is one motion versus brand new logo land is another.
Well, I'll just say in closing, thank you so much for taking the time, Ramin. We're so grateful for the partnership. And I'll just say one word that comes to mind as I was thinking about spending time with you, at the risk of sounding maybe a little too formal here. It's just a true privilege to be a partner with you, Ramin, and with Sumo Logic, and we're just super excited about the journey ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. Great to see you. You're looking young as usual, so I'm jealous of that. You got a bunch of hair.
Thanks, Ramin. And thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned for more meaningful discussions with the leaders shaping the revenue operations movement.